Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Judah Casey. Together we learn about biblical business principles, becoming who you're meant to be, and what being a light in the darkness looks like. You're listening to the Vision Pod. Thank you, Jesse Bourassa, for coming on the podcast. Jesse is a pastor based out of Moose Jaw, and he's a pastor's kid that's pastoring, and he loves Jesus, right?
That's me. You got me.
Yeah. So how do you know that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing right now?
Oh man, see, that's a good question. I grew up as a pastor's kid. I grew up in a very charismatic church, and so when I felt called into ministry, it was in a dramatic experience kind of way. I was 16 years old. I was at a small camp up in northern Alberta, and the pastor who was running the camp just said, "Does anyone feel called to full-time ministry?" And my thought was, I said, "Well, everyone's called to full-time ministry," and so I said, "Sure, that's me." And I don't think I ever made it up to the front. I think I was on the carpet before anyone was near me, and I heard. When I say heard, this is heard. And it wasn't, I didn't hear it with my ears. It was like an overwhelming sound in my heart. And I heard the Lord tell me that I was a pastor. And just my relationship with the Lord is, God says, "You're a pastor." And I'm laying on the floor, nose grinding into the carpet. And I said, "God, what kind? What kind of pastor? Am I a youth pastor, a missionary pastor, a worship pastor, a senior pastor, an associate pastor, children's pastor, like an executive pastor? What kind of pastor am I?" And he's never told me. And so that's the part that I'm walking out by faith, is that I'm doing the only part that I know God's told me to do. I'm a pastor. And the way that I pastor is I've been a senior pastor now for oh goodness, just about 15 years. And started off as a junior associate pastor when I was in my very early 20s. I told the pastor of that church, I told him that I would happily be his junior associate pastor for 10 to 12 years. And then,
Wow.
Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn. I was young, just finished Bible college. I said, I'll be your junior associate for 10 to 12 years. And less than a year later, he left to go plant another church. And I called him to say, like, "What should I do while you're gone?" And he says, "Well, preach every Sunday, feed the people, love the people." And then he never came back. And so
Wow.
so that would have been how old would I have been? I would have been 23 when that happened. So I've been a full-time senior pastor since I was 23, and been doing it ever since, loving God, stepping in faith every piece of the way. And just trying to be obedient to him.
Nice. So what was that like, being so young, leading a church?
Oh man, that was difficult, honestly. Like, you deal with a lot of insecurities really fast, and so my big insecurity was I'd walk up on stage and I'm about to tell people about Jesus, and they've been saved longer than I've been alive. And so that weighed on me big time. This need to impress, this need to prove myself, and so you do all kinds of wacky little things, so what I did, I was so insecure about my age that, it was a small town in northern Alberta, bunch of farmers, just salt of the earth kind of people. And I wore a suit and tie every Sunday. No one else wore anything more than jeans, but I wore a suit and tie because I needed to prove to them that I was taking it seriously, and until one of a beautiful board member, beautiful spirit, came to me and he said, like, "Pastor, why are you doing this? Are you wearing a suit for us? Or are you wearing a suit for you?" And so then they were they were so good with, helping me work through my own insecurities about my age. And because it's tough. It is tough. You go out there, you want to tell someone about Jesus, and you know that they know more than you. And so you gotta learn really quick that you're not pastoring because you know the most. You're not the preacher because you have read the Bible the most. You're the pastor, you're the preacher because you're called, not because you have secret knowledge that no one else knows, or even that you have experience that no one else has had. Like, that's not why I was the pastor. I was the pastor because I was called, not because of my age or skills even.
So how did you find yourself preparing for Sundays,
Oh, well,
knowing that?
that's the way that I prepare is developed over time. The planning, the process, like getting ready, developing a sermon, has changed over time. I used to be a script writer. I'd write out every word. This is exactly what I'm going to say. This is how I'm going to say it. And I had a script in front of me every single Sunday. And part of that was I wanted to take it seriously. I wanted to prove that I was doing the work and I was prepared. But the first time you build a house, it should take you longer than the 50th time you built a house. And so now, like, it used to be 35 hours of sermon prep, a week. And now, like, it's changed over time. And, we're talking maybe now 6 hours of like pen to paper.
Oh well.
So that develops, and you learn yourself, you learn your own heart, you learn, how you develop, how you even look at the scriptures, and you work on your tools, and you get good at your craft. And so, yeah, so it does shift, though. It does shift. And even how I preached changed. I started off very much as a storyteller. All it was stories, and I would tell personal stories because they already know all the Bible stories. And so I just told the personal stories, get to know me, the new pastor, this is who I am. And then you shift from, the building that connection with the congregation, that personal relationship. Now you're trying to connect them not to you, but to the Lord through you. And so you start telling less personal stories and more about Jesus stories, like kind of things like that. So even how you preach changes depending on the season that you're in with the church and where the church is in.
Yeah, so you say you were called, you felt a calling. How does someone know who's listening to this if they're being called to something?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's kind of like asking, how do you know if you're in love? How do you know if you're in love? And it's like, well, I could tell you what it was like when I fell in love, but you're different than me, and so it kind of, I don't want to say it kind of boils down to what does called look like or feel like to you, but the truth is it's going to be intensely personal. Just like falling in love, like it's going to be intensely personal. How do you know when you're in love? Like, man, you just know, you just feel it. And you got some objective things that you can check off the list. Like, I feel like this when they're around. I feel like this when they're not around. Like, there are some objective things you can look at with yourself. But for most people, like, calling is intensely personal, and and so because of that, I could tell you what mine was like, what I felt. Like for me, like I heard the voice of the Lord in my heart. Like it was overwhelming and obvious. And some people, it's not like that. Some people, it's they're reluctantly dragged in. Some people never know, and yet they're so obviously in their situation. And then even so, for example, I felt overwhelmingly called. Like I'm talking, I had a charismatic experience on that carpet. I knew. And so that was a Friday night. By Monday morning, I'm still going, did that even happen? Like, was that real? And it's like, you think, and people who've never had big experiences like I had, they think if I had a big experience, I would know and I would never doubt. Like I would be convinced, I would know for sure, and I would never doubt. I would commit my whole life to it, and it would be easy because, it would be so obvious. And it's like, man, I had the obvious call. Like I can still hear his voice. Like I can still like what he said to me. Like I still know what the carpet smelled like. And man, by Monday, it's like God has forsaken me. This like not really, but like like but by Monday, you're like, was that real? Did that happen? Okay, like what am I gonna do? I still got to go to school. I got class. Like people think that big experiences hold them longer than they really do. Like they think, man, if I could see an angel or if I could just have this spiritual encounter, it would hold me for the rest of my life. And the truth is, for me anyway, that hasn't been the case. Like, man, all that does is show me how little faith I sometimes have, is that I could have all these big experiences, these big charismatic experiences, and still wake up on Monday and go, did that really happen?
Right.
And so, yeah, to answer your question, like someone who's wondering if they're called, um, I would just say it's deeply personal. What does that look like to you? Don't judge it off of somebody else. It's like falling in love. How do you know?
Hmm.
And it's like, well, you're going to feel in love sometimes, and other times you're not going to feel in love. I feel called sometimes. Sometimes I don't,
Hmm.
and yeah, yeah. So it's a very personal thing.
So did your father like play a big role in you stepping out in what you felt called for?
Oh, yeah, like big time. So what my dad did is he really gave me a framework for
Hmm.
what a pastor could look like. Although I gotta say, like my dad and he knows it. Like when I told my dad, like, Dad, I feel called to be a pastor, he went to me and he said, Jesse, can you do anything else? Because he knew like it's a hard call, man. Like it's
Hmm.
a hard, dangerous call. And so he was really hoping I'd be an electrician. But and of course now we laugh about it. We're pastoring churches. But what I really appreciate about my father was that my father uh, was the exact same man Sunday morning to Monday morning. He was the
Hmm.
exact same man. The same pastor that taught on forgiveness and kindness was the father that practiced forgiveness and kindness. And my parents did a really good job of sheltering us from the harsh side of church. And so we grew up loving church. My parents were getting backstabbed and betrayed and bad mouthed, and we never heard any of it. Like they never brought the only thing from church they brought home was good things. And so we grew up loving church and wanting to pastor and wanting to be like my dad, like that kind of thing. And so, yeah, what my dad really really showed was what a pastor could be, how consistent a pastor could live. And that's what I've been trying to do ever since, is just be the same guy, Monday morning as Sunday morning.
Hmm. So what makes that call so difficult?
What makes it difficult is that you never get to turn it off.
Hmm.
Like when you're a pastor, you never get to turn it off. Like, when you're a bank manager, you walk through Walmart, you're not the bank manager of Walmart. You're just a guy
Right.
walking through Walmart. You take your kids to the park, you're just a dad taking your kids to the park. But a pastor, it never turns off. And the reason why it never turns off is because you're your family's pastor. My wife comes to my church. I am my wife's pastor. My kids come to my church. I am my children's pastor.
Hmm.
And so I don't get to just not be the pastor anymore. So
Hmm.
if I lose my temper, if I'm short and snappy with my kids, their dad was short and snappy, yes, but their pastor was short and snappy with them too. And so it never turns off. Like I literally, I'll leave my office, and as I'm about to step into the parking lot, I'll go, you got to smile. Because what if somebody's walking by and they see me scowling walking out of the church? It's like, that's not good. Like when I'm in my car and I'm stopped at a stoplight, I have to smile. And it's like, why? Because what if there's someone, who knows who I am, who's coming across the road, and here I am just sitting there like I've had the worst day of my life, like that show, like it never turns off.
Hmm.
I take my kids to the swimming pool, like I'm Pastor Jesse, because there's gonna be someone there that recognizes me, and like what I'm gonna be short and I'm gonna yell at my kids or something like that. It's like, no, you have to maintain that level of consistency all the time, and it's hard. And a lot of guys, a lot of pastors, unfortunately, or a lot of people called to ministry, they're so good with everyone else, like they're so like friendly, kind, patient with everyone else, and then they get home and they think, now I can turn it off. Now I can just be me. And so their families get the worst parts of them. Like I have to be kind to everyone, but not at home. I have to be patient with everyone at work, but at home, it's my space and I can finally relax. And so they're actually sometimes, that's why a lot of pastors' kids, they see the hypocrisy. They see dad preaching about forgiveness and they see him holding a grudge on Monday.
Right.
And so, but I never saw that with my dad. My dad was consistent. And so that's how I've strived to live my life every day, was to be the same guy everywhere. And some days it's harder than others. I'll tell you that. But that's why it's a tough call. It never turns off. It never ever turns off.
Hmm. Yeah, that would be difficult. So, what is something that you're so confident in preaching about? Something that you can just preach like you just woke up and you
Oh
can
man.
go for 2 hours
Oh
talking about.
man. Yeah. 2 hours is long,
I don't
but
know, 2 hours.
so I've got two things. So the first one was when I was in Bible college, we would do school tours, right? So the team, the college team would have a worship team and a preaching team, and then we'd go to a church. The band would lead worship, and then a student would preach. And so I did student preaching, and so I had one sermon that I preached like 100 times in every church in like Western Canada. Like I preached it everywhere, and it was David and Goliath. And oh, I can preach David and Goliath with my eyes closed, no problem. Like both hands tied behind my back and a Bible in French. Like I can do David and Goliath, no problem. And but as a subject, one of the things that I love to preach is I love to preach on grace.
Mm,
Oh, like it's grace is like just it means so much to me. You know that my righteousness was bought by Jesus Christ. And my righteousness is not held or judged based off of my own right action, but on the right action of Jesus. And for me, every sermon is a sermon isn't a sermon until you've talked about grace, until you've talked about Jesus Christ and what He did on the cross. You know, if you haven't talked about that, you've lectured, which is great. You know, you've taught. Sure, we need teaching, but it's not a sermon until you've gotten to Jesus on the cross. And so, at our church, every single Sunday, we land on Jesus every single Sunday. The sermon we preach on tithing. We're landing on Jesus and the cross, no matter what. And then we do a call for salvation every Sunday because that's what it's all about. It's not a sermon unless we're at the foot of the cross.
so how can you tie that in? Sometimes
Oh man.
when I hear that, sometimes I find it hard to tie it in.
Oh brother, like it is. If you can't find Jesus in the Bible, like He's there. He is in every subject. He is so. For example, this last week, just one of those fun little God things. This last Sunday we're talking on tithing. We're in a series called God and Gold, talking about generosity and tithing. And so the sermon was on tithing, and we had 4 people who gave their heart to the Lord on a tithing sermon. And man, we're bold with our ask too. Like when we don't go up there and we say like who would like to take one step closer to God? Who wants to have a spiritual experience? We literally, our altar calls, they go, who is not a Christian? You don't call yourself a Christian, but you want to become a Christian. And then we don't count hands because the room is dark. We can't see anything anyway. And so then we ask them after the service to take a card, fill it out, check that box, and go and bring it to our welcome center. And they have a conversation. And
Hmm.
that's how we count 4. It's not 4 hands. It's 4 people that
Right.
actually went and talked to them and said, I wasn't a Christian and now I am. And then
Hmm.
there's an exchange there. And so we had 4 of them on tithing. And so like it's easy. You talk about tithing, it's like, here's 10%. Then you just say something like, does God only want 10% of your life? He wants 100% of your life. Well, how can He ask you for 100% of your life? Well, the reason He can ask you for 100% of your life is because He gave 100% of His life.
Hmm.
And then you're on the cross. And then you're on the cross. You're talking about how Jesus gave it all.
Right. Yeah.
So and it's like that on every subject, man. Like if you can't find the cross, like that's a tough thing to do.
Hmm. Yeah.
And he's in every subject. Yeah, if you can't find Jesus in patience, if you can't find the cross on forgiveness, if you can't find the cross on love and mercy and grace, or and letting go of bitterness, or raising up your children, and giving them the best start at life that you can, it's all on the cross. Like it all comes to the cross.
Okay, let's how would you relate raising up your children to the cross?
Okay, raising up children to the cross. Uh, okay, so what would I say? So I do series. So I do 4 weeks at a time, and so it'd
Right.
be a series on family, and probably one of those it'd be on parenting, and I would talk about parenting, loving your child. You'd give anything for them, like you would give your life for them. And Jesus calls Himself our Father, and what did He do? He gave His life for us. Where did he do that? On the cross. Your children are going to make mistakes. Right now that they're going to make mistakes. Do you have kids, Judah, by the way?
No.
No, okay, so you don't have
Not yet.
kids. You could answer this now. If you were to have kids, do you think they'd be perfect? Like, do you think they would never make a mistake in their life?
No.
So they're going to make a mistake already.
Yeah.
But already you'd love them. You'd love them even if they made a mistake, and you would love them and you would show that love for them. And it's like, here's Jesus. He knew we'd make mistakes and he showed his love for us. How did he show his love for us? On the cross. It's greater love has no man than this, than to give up his life for a friend. And that's for a friend. He didn't give up his life for friends. He gave his life up for children, and we're the children of God. Like, we're on the cross, man.
Well, a lot of world seems like it's getting a little bit darker. Everybody's finding something to complain about. How do you give hope to your congregation? What do they have to hope for?
Oh man, our hope is not in this world. Our hope is in Jesus Christ. I'm not. So yeah, if I was looking at nature to save me, well, man, I'd be pretty upset and it would feel hopeless. If I was looking at government to save me, man, I'd give up and I'd feel pretty hopeless. If I was looking for a sports team to save me, I would give up and I'd feel pretty hopeless. But man, I'm not looking. My hope isn't in any of those things. My hope is in Jesus Christ. I'm not a citizen of this earth. This is not my home. My home is eternal. My home is in heaven, and heaven is right here in my heart, and it is not dependent on what happens around me. My circumstances do not dictate where my hope is. It's like the world's crumbling down. Okay, this isn't where I'm supposed to live. My body starts breaking down. Okay, this is not the body that I'm going to live in with eternity. My hope isn't in my health. My hope isn't in my money. My hope isn't in my politics. My hope is in Jesus Christ and him alone. And he is unshakable. He is unchangeable, and he will hold me and sustain me. And, okay, the world's getting darker. That's not, I don't want to say that's fine. That's the reality. But the higher reality, the truer reality is that Jesus, is calling me home, and Jesus is saving me, and he's saving this world one soul at a time. And yeah, that's my piece of hope is fix your eyes upon Jesus.
That's right, the author and finisher of your faith. That's what I was gonna say. It seemed like that was the verse that would go with it.
It's like, man, like, I'm Canadian, but I'm not. I'm a Christian. Right. Like I'm like that's who I am. Like that is fundamentally who I am. And I think the hope of the world is Jesus Christ through the local church. I don't think it's through anything else. You can do a whole lot of good, but doing good doesn't save. And man, the salvation comes from the Lord.
How can someone do something big for God? How can they how can they steward their time well to do something that they're called to do?
Oh man, first thing, you want to steward your time, you got to steward yourself. You gotta look into your own heart. You want to do something big for God, you start right here. And usually the big things start off real small. It's amazing the number of Christians who are convinced that if terrorists kicked in the door and there was a gun to their head, are you a Christian? Yes or no? That they'd say yes. Because it's so easy as Christians to think that what we want to do is one big dramatic action. But what it seems to be is that doing big things for God is doing a whole bunch of little things every day. It's are you going to forgive right now in this moment? Are you going to love? Are you going to show kindness? Are you going to extend mercy and grace? Like to the people around you right now, every day, all the time. These little things, constantly. Rather than what's the one big thing I could do, man? I go like, man, what's one little thing that you can do right now, to someone else? What's one little smile? What's one little like, hey man, I really want to encourage you in this. Like, what's the one little thing where you can be the hands and feet of Jesus right now? I would say, like, you want to do something big, start real small. And I'm reminded of there's a passage there, right, in 2 Samuel when David's at the end of his life and he wants to make an offering to God. right? And he's going to make this great big offering. He's going to sacrifice all these oxen. He's going to build an altar, build a fire. And he goes to the farmer. Remember that story? And he wants to buy the land. He wants to buy the land, the cattle, and the wood. And the farmer says, I'll give it to you. You can have it. Do the big thing. And David says, I will not give to the Lord that which costs me nothing. And so then, which is beautiful, like that's amazing, great, wow, here he is, he's going to sacrifice, he's going to give, right? But then it tells us how much he gave. It says that David bought the land, the cattle, and the wood for 30 pieces of silver. And it's like, he's the king of Israel. Like that's nothing. Like he didn't, like that cost him very, very little, but he did it. And, like for a lot of Christians, we're willing to do the thing that'll cost a lot. It's like, God, send me to Mexico and I'll go to the garbage dumps at Tijuana and I'll feed the orphans, but like, don't ask me to forgive my father, but don't ask me to pray for our government. Don't ask me to release the bitterness that's in my heart. I'll do one big thing, but I don't want to actually I don't want to do 30 little things. And here's King David. He was about to do one big thing. He was about to have a great big sacrifice. But how did he do it? It was with 30 little things. Is how he did it. And so, yeah, if you want to do a big thing for God, man, start with that small thing. Forgive, love, be kind, be patient. Like do that today. And who knows, maybe you're one of few that get to do one big thing. But maybe you are one of those few, but you are certainly one of the many that are called to do just these small little things every day. Maybe it'll build to something big and obvious. Maybe it won't. Love your kids. Read them a book. Tell them about Jesus. Pray for them. They don't feel big, but my goodness, they become the big things right away. Or not right away. They become the big things. They certainly do.
What message would you have for like churches across Canada or believers across Canada?
Across Canada, oh man, I feel woefully underqualified for that. I would say just keep your eyes on Jesus. There's so many easy ways to get distracted. There's so many easy things that can consume your time, your energy, your passion, your attention. And I'd be like, man, like what could be more important than Jesus Christ? What political thing could be more important than Jesus? What anything, what crisis could be more important than Jesus? Like fix your eyes on him, devote your heart to him, be passionately pursuing Jesus in everything you do. It's so easy to get off track with good things or important things. But man, there is nothing more important than him. And so, whatever you do, brother, do it for the Lord.
So how do you remind yourself to do that?
Oh, that's every day. That's every day. That's constant. You think like, oh, that's easy. Just think about Jesus. Oh no, like distractions are hard. Like it's really easy to do that. And so it's a constant reminder of just being like, what's this for? Who's this for? Why am I doing this? Am I doing this for me? Examine my own heart. Like, is it Psalm 56? Where it says, search me? I don't think it is Psalm 56. Oh no, I think I said the wrong thing. But it's in the Psalms. It's in the Psalms where it says, search my heart, examine my heart, O Lord. Point out anything that offends you. And it's constant going like that because God, like, I want to do right by you. I don't want to be moved by my agenda. I want to be moved by yours. I want it all to be about you because you can do the right thing for the wrong reason. And I want every part of who I am to be focused on Jesus Christ. And so it's a lot of prayer. It's a lot of introspection. It's a lot of accountability. It's a lot of having good people around you saying like, hey, why are you doing this? Like, are you really doing it for this reason? And then if you start justifying yourself, you're probably wrong, that kind of thing. Like it's a constant battle, but it's worth it. It's worth it. Like we don't have a lot of time, and I want my time to be spent on eternal things, and you can do a whole lot of good things for the wrong reason. And I want to do it for Jesus and Jesus alone. Whatever I do, I want to do it for his glory. So I can do a lot of good, and I can do a lot of good for my glory. and I can do a lot of good for my reputation. I can do a lot of good for people around me. I can make the world a better place for the people around me. But man, what is the profit of man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? I want my soul fixed on Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's what I don't know if I'd want to say that to all the believers across Canada,
Right, right.
but that's what I'd say to me and you.
So how do you plan like ahead in the future, or do you even?
Oh yeah, I'm a big time planner, and
Okay,
so I plan out my series. I'm a senior pastor. I plan out my
right.
preaching series 6 months at a time. And
Okay.
so what I'll do is at the start of or at the end of the year, so like in the end of December, I'll fast. I'll go on a fast and I'll pray, and then I'll just start asking the Lord, "What do you want? Like, where do you want us to go? What do you want me to speak on? Like, and be praying a lot with that way." And then I'll chart out 6 months worth of sermons, and so what that means is 6 series. Every month is a series for me, and so January is a series, March is a series. And so I'll plan out the series, and then I'll plan out the topics within them. So I'll actually write out, this is what I want to talk about on the subject of family. Okay, so there's family. So you got, and I'll pray and it'll be okay. So there's marriage, there's parenting, there's difficulties, and then there's, forgiveness or something like that. Like as an example, I'll walk through that way. I'll plan it out 6 months at a time, and then I'll bring it to my lead team. And then what we'll do is we'll actually chart it out. We'll do the whole year on the calendar.
Mhm.
And so we'll look at the whole previous year, and then we'll say the first question we ask is what's missing, because that's
Mhm.
where people look at it and be like, oh man, like this is every sermon we preached in the whole year. And it's like, man, that means it's been over a year since we've done anything on finances, or it's been over a
Mhm.
year since we've done a book study or mental health or something like that. And so okay, well, let's get that in there, and then there's some things like there's every year, like every year you should be doing family. Every year you should be doing, gospel, like something like that, whatever that might be in your situation. There's some things that are every year you got to speak on this. Some things are like once every 10 years you can talk about it. And so we walk through that with the eldership or with the lead team. So we look at the previous year, and then we look at the next 6 months, and then we chart it all out. And yeah, and then usually so in the end of June or in the end of June, beginning of June, then we'll do the same thing. We'll fast, and then I'll chart out July to December. And like some things, it's like December. I wonder what we're going to preach in December. It's going to be Christmas, like of course. And so some of them are just they're written for you. Other ones you let the Lord lead you through it. And that saved me so many times. So many times that saved me. And by I mean saved me is like I've had a couple come in and they talk about their marriage problems, and then like that next week I'm preaching on it, and then they'll come to me and be like, you broke confidence. You said,
Right.
you only preached that because we told you. And I get to go to them and be like, I planned that 6 months ago. Like
Right.
I planned this with the elder. You can talk to people. Like I did not just plan this week. This was a year ago. And that saved me. But actually a really recent story that was kind of a beautiful moment kind of thing was, so planned it out 6 months in advance. And this would have been a couple weeks ago. I was walking through the Sermon on the Mount, and one of the passages that Jesus says on the Sermon on the Mount, it says, "Blessed are those who mourn," in the Beatitudes, right? Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And so I planned that out 6 months in advance, and I'm getting ready to go up. We do 3 services here. In the first service, I was getting ready to go up to preach on blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And as I'm getting onto the stage, 2 minutes before I go on the stage, I get a text saying that my grandmother passed away. And so I'm literally walking up onto the stage, reading this thing, seeing that, that my grandmother has passed, and now I look at, and I'm about to preach a sermon on God comforts those who mourn, and it's like, wow, like what a beautiful moment. Like did God know 6 months ago that was going to happen? Of course he did. And so here I was 6 months ago planning the sermon I was going to preach for when grandmother passed away. I didn't know she was going to pass away Sunday morning as I was walking up on stage, but there you go. And like that, my ministry has been filled with things like that where, you plan it. And I've gotten a lot of kickback from some people who say you can't plan the Holy Spirit. You know, 6 months in advance, like, oh, you gotta seek God fresh in the moment. And it's like, sure, yes, like I understand that. But man, it takes an awful lot of faith, to look at right now. I'm looking at Christmas going, what does God want the people to hear in December? I don't know. Like, I don't know what's going on in December. Like, what the world could change between now and December. But I'm trusting that the Spirit of God is leading me. And man, I'm writing those sermons by faith that in 6 months this will be an appropriate message for the people in that moment. And so I do 6 months at a time, and that's kind of how I do that.
Hmm. So when you fast at the beginning of the year to pick these different topics, how do you know that you're hearing God's voice?
Faith.
Faith.
Faith. And so, because I don't know, right? Like, I don't know what's going
Right.
to happen in 6 months. So I'm going, God, I am trusting and believing that this impression I'm getting in my heart is from you. And living by faith is a fun thing. The Bible says that we're supposed to live by faith, but the truth is most Christians would rather live by obedience. And so, what do I mean by that? What I mean is, if God showed up in your room right now, the roof opened up and God descended in the room and he said, Judah, I want you to go outside, do 10 jumping jacks and run a marathon. And then you did. Would you have acted in faith or obedience?
Obedience.
Obedience, right? Of course, that's obedience. And there's a lot of Christians that say, God, I'll do exactly what you tell me.
Hmm.
And they sit and they wait because they want to be obedient. But God wants us to live by faith. And so what's the difference? Well, it's like this. If God were to show up in your room and he descended and he said, Judah, I want you to get out of the room, right? Now you could sit there, and I think a lot of Christians do in their own little way. They'll say, God, which foot should I use first? God, should I crawl, walk, skip, or jump out of my room? God, should I run out of my room? God, should I run backwards out of my room? And then we sit and wait, because we want to get it right. We want to be obedient. We heard the call, go and do a thing, and we want to be obedient to that call, but we want obedience to take every step. And so we'll sit there and we'll say, God, which foot should I use first? And then we get silence. There's nothing. God, should I walk, run, or crawl out of this room? Silence. We don't hear anything. And we wait. And we wait till every step is an obedience step. Where, man, like God calls you, he says, Judah, get up and get out of your room. It's like, okay, well, I'm by faith, I'm going to stand. And by faith, I'm going to lead with my left foot. And by faith, I'm going to run. And by faith, I'm not going to stop until I hear another thing. But a lot of Christians, they get the big thing. They get the big call, the big obedience call, but they want to walk it out by obedience. They don't want to walk it out by faith. So, for example, I said it right at the start. I asked God immediately. I'm nose down on the carpet, and I hear God say, "Jesse, you're a pastor." And then I immediately went back. I said, "God, what kind? What kind of pastor?"
Right.
Right? Because I want to be obedient. He has never. I say it kind of as a joke, but it's not a joke. He has never answered me. He has never answered me. I've been a senior pastor. I've been a youth pastor. I've been a junior associate pastor. He's never once told me what kind of pastor I should be. I am a senior pastor by faith. I have faith. This is what God has called me to be. When he said pastor, this is how I'm walking out that call of obedience. And so, yeah, a lot of Christians, man, what we want to do, we want to walk every step by obedience. But man, we've got a big call. We've got a big call. We are called to go into all the world and make disciples. Well, God, who, how, when? Like we're called to be thankful. This is what, like, I call you to be thankful. That's what Paul said for each one of us. The call on our life is to be thankful. Well, who, how, when? I'll be thankful. Like what? Like we're supposed to pray for each other. Who, how, when? It's like, man, that's what the faith is for. Like we've got the big obedient call. Now live it by faith. And so, anyway, yeah. Sorry, I'm preaching a sermon at you again.
No, it's good. No, it's good. All right. Well, that's kind of our time here. Do you have any last thing you want to say?
Oh man, yeah. Let's live faithfully, walking towards Jesus.
I like it.
He's worth it, man. He's worth it. Like, yeah. So much this world can shake you. So much this world can let you down. So much this world will absolutely devastate you if you build on it. But man, build your house on the rock of Jesus Christ. and the storms will come. The waters will rage against it. Man, you'll be standing, not because you're such a good house builder, but because he is such a firm foundation. He's the one that holds us. So fix your eyes on him. Walk for him in the small things every day. Do it all for his glory. And we'll see you in the kingdom.
I like it. Thanks for coming on my podcast and sharing your wisdom.
Thanks for having me, Drew. This is awesome.
No problem.